Kicked out of the house I built, cut off like dead weight. She staged a takeover until my quiet counterstrike forced a choice none of them expected. My daughter-in-law smiled sweetly as she held out her manicured hand. "I'll be taking those keys now, Dad." The words dripped with false kindness, but her eyes held something else entirely. Cold calculation. Pure entitlement. I looked down at the brass keys in my palm, the same keys that had unlocked the front door of my family home for 37 years. The same keys that had let me into the house I'd built with my own hands, board by board, nail by nail. The house where my late wife Sarah had planted roses in the garden. The house where my grandson took his first steps across the hardwood floors I'd installed myself. But according to Jessica, my son David's wife of 3 years, those keys no longer belong to me. "The house is in David's name now," she continued, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used whenever she wanted something. "And honestly, we think it's time you moved into one of those nice senior communities. You know, somewhere more appropriate for someone your age." I felt my jaw clench as the full weight of her words hit me. Somewhere more appropriate, like I was a piece of furniture that no longer matched the decor. Like 37 years of memories, of building a life, of raising my son in these very rooms, meant nothing more than an inconvenience to her interior design plans. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Here's what Jessica didn't know as she stood there in my living room, already mentally redecorating the space where Sarah and I had celebrated every Christmas morning, every birthday, every milestone of our son's childhood. She had no idea that the quiet, accommodating father-in-law she thought she could manipulate had spent 40 years building a construction empire from nothing. She had no clue that the man she was trying to warehouse in some retirement facility had connections, resources, and a strategic mind that had outmaneuvered competitors twice her size. Most importantly, she had absolutely no idea what she'd just set in motion. You see, 3 months earlier, I'd made what I thought was a generous decision. David had been struggling financially. His tech startup had failed, leaving him with crushing debt and a credit score that made getting a mortgage impossible. Jessica, meanwhile, had expensive tastes that didn't align with their actual income. She wanted the big house, the prestigious address, the lifestyle that would impress her country club friends. So when they came to me, tears in their eyes, talking about their dreams of starting a family and needing stability, I did what any loving father would do. I transferred the deed of my home into David's name, thinking it would help them qualify for the refinancing they needed to get back on their feet. The house was worth $2.3 million, sitting on prime real estate in one of the city's most desirable neighborhoods. I kept living there, of course. It was still my home. David assured me nothing would change. "Dad, this is just paperwork," he'd said, hugging me tight. "You built this place. It'll always be yours." Jessica had nodded along, playing the grateful daughter-in-law perfectly. But as I stood there that Tuesday afternoon, watching Jessica examine those keys like they were her prize for winning some contest I didn't know I'd entered, I realized I'd made the classic mistake that destroys families every single day. I'd confused legal ownership with moral right. I'd assumed that blood was thicker than greed. I was wrong. "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Jessica's smile widened, and I caught a glimpse of the predator beneath the suburban housewife facade. "Oh, don't worry. We've already looked into several lovely facilities. Sunset Manor has a waiting list, but David knows someone on the board. They have activities, meal plans, people your own age to socialize with. You'll love it." She'd already picked out my prison. The calculation was breathtaking in its audacity. They'd researched senior living facilities while I was still processing their request for help. They'd planned this entire scenario while sitting at my dining room table, eating meals I'd cooked, accepting my generosity with smiles and gratitude that were apparently nothing more than performance art. "And my belongings?" I managed to ask. "Well, most of your furniture is pretty dated," Jessica said with a dismissive wave. "The facilities come furnished anyway. We'll donate whatever doesn't fit. David's already arranged for an estate sale company to handle the rest." An estate sale, like I was already dead. I looked past Jessica to where David stood in the doorway, avoiding my eyes. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike in this very driveway, The teenager I'd stayed up with during his college application anxiety, the young man who'd cried in my arms when his mother died. He couldn't even look at me as his wife dismantled my life with the efficiency of a corporate restructuring. "David," I said quietly, "is this really what you want?" He shifted uncomfortably, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Dad, you're 72. This house is too big for one person. The maintenance alone." He trailed off, still not meeting my gaze. The maintenance. The house I'd maintained meticulously for nearly 4 decades was suddenly too much for me to handle, despite the fact that I'd just finished repainting the entire exterior and updating the electrical system. But it wasn't too much for them to inherit and profit from. Besides, Jessica interjected, clearly tired of the conversation dragging on, "we're thinking of starting a family soon. We'll need the space. The master bedroom would make a perfect nursery, and we could convert your workshop into a playroom." My workshop. The space where I'd built David's first treehouse, where I'd crafted Sarah's jewelry box by hand, where I'd spent countless hours creating things with love and patience. They wanted to turn it into a playroom for children who didn't even exist yet. That's when I understood with crystal clarity that this wasn't about my age or their concern for my well-being. This was about money. Pure and simple. They wanted my $2 million house, and I was the inconvenient obstacle standing between them and their windfall. Jessica held out her hand again, more insistently this time. "The keys, Dad." I looked at those keys one more time. 37 years of history reduced to metal and brass. Then I looked at Jessica's expectant face, at David's guilty posture, at the room where Sarah and I had planned our future, and where they were now planning mine. Something shifted inside me. Not anger exactly, though that was certainly there. Something colder and more calculating. Something that recognized a battle when it saw one. "Of course," I said, placing the keys gently in Jessica's outstretched palm. "I'll start packing right away." The relief on both their faces was almost comical. They'd expected a fight, tears, maybe some emotional manipulation about family loyalty and respect for elders. Instead, they got compliance. Easy, grateful compliance from the doddering old man they thought they'd outsmarted. Jessica pocketed the keys with visible satisfaction. "Oh, and Dad? The estate sale company will be here Thursday to start cataloging everything. I hope that's enough time for you to sort through your personal items. Thursday, 3 days to pack up a lifetime." "That should be plenty of time," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. After they left, I stood alone in the house that was no longer legally mine, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived that had just been declared worthless by the people I'd loved most. But instead of despair, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: clarity. You see, what Jessica and David had failed to consider in their rush to claim their inheritance was a simple but crucial detail. While the house might be in David's name, the land it sat on told a different story entirely. A story they were about to learn the hard way. I walked to my home office, past the family photos that would soon be sold to strangers, past the bookshelf filled with construction manuals and business journals, past the filing cabinet that held 40 years of contracts, permits, and very carefully maintained legal documents. I pulled out a thick folder labeled Property Records and spread the contents across my desk. Surveys, easement agreements, mineral rights documentation, and most importantly, the original land purchase contract from 1987. The contract that established something called a life estate, giving me the legal right to live on this property until my death, regardless of who owned the structures built upon it. It was a standard protection I'd insisted on when I first bought the land, back when I was young and paranoid about protecting my family's future. Sarah had laughed at my obsession with legal safeguards back then. "Robert, you're acting like someone's going to steal our home," she'd said. Turns out, she was right to laugh, and I was right to be paranoid. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Margaret Chen, real estate attorney and the daughter of my former business partner. I'd helped put her through law school 20 years ago when her father couldn't afford the tuition. "Margaret," I said when she answered, "it's Robert Sullivan. I need your help with something urgent." "Mr. Sullivan, it's so good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I need you to explain to my son and daughter-in-law exactly what a life estate means. And Margaret," I think we're going to need to have a very detailed conversation about property law." As I hung up the phone, I felt the first spark of satisfaction I'd experienced since this nightmare began. Jessica wanted to play games with an old man she thought was helpless and naive. She was about to discover that 40 years in construction had taught me more than just how to build houses. It had taught me how to tear them down too. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30, just like I had every day for the past 40 years. Coffee first, then a walk around the property to check on things. Habit dies hard, even when your world has been turned upside down by people who think they're smarter than you are. But today felt different. Today I had purpose again. I was pouring my second cup when the doorbell rang. Through the kitchen window, I could see Margaret Chen standing on my front porch, briefcase in hand, looking every inch the successful attorney she'd become. "Right on time." "Margaret," I said, opening the door. "Thank you for coming so early." "Are you kidding? After what you told me on the phone yesterday, I couldn't sleep." She stepped inside and immediately looked around with the appreciative eye of someone who understood quality craftsmanship. "This place is even more beautiful than I remembered from when I was a kid." We settled in my kitchen, the same kitchen where her father and I had planned dozens of construction projects over the years. The same kitchen where I'd helped her with her homework when she was 12 and dreaming of becoming a lawyer. Funny how life comes full circle. "So," Margaret said, opening her briefcase and pulling out several legal documents, "I spent half the night researching your property records. Robert, what you have here is absolutely bulletproof." She spread the papers across my kitchen table, pointing to specific clauses and legal terminology that would have been gibberish to most people. But I wasn't most people. I'd learned to read contracts the hard way, back when one missed detail could bankrupt a small construction company. "The life estate clause is ironclad," Margaret continued. "Your son may own the house, but you own the right to occupy this land until your death. No one can force you to leave. No one can sell the property out from under you. And most importantly, any attempt to make your life uncomfortable or to constructively evict you could result in the entire deed transfer being voided." I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "And they have no idea about any of this? Based on what you've told me, they never bothered to do a proper title search. They saw the house deed transfer and assumed that gave them complete control." Margaret shook her head in amazement. "It's the kind of mistake that first-year law students learn not to make. What about the estate sale? Jessica's already arranged for people to come catalog my belongings." Margaret's expression hardened. "They can't touch anything in this house without your explicit written consent. If they try, it's theft, plain and simple. And if they've already taken or disposed of any of your property, we can file criminal charges." The coffee suddenly tasted better than it had in days. "So what do we do?" "Well, we could send them a formal legal notice explaining their position. But honestly, Robert, after what they've put you through, I think they deserve something with a bit more impact." Margaret's eyes gleamed with the kind of anticipation I recognized from her father. The Chen family had never backed down from a fight when they knew they were right. "What did you have in mind?" "How about we let them discover their mistake, the same way they let you discover their plan? No warning, no explanation, just consequences." I thought about Jessica's smug smile as she'd pocketed my keys, about David's refusal to meet my eyes as his wife carved up my life like a Thanksgiving turkey, about the casual cruelty of planning an estate sale for a man who was still very much alive. "I like the way you think, Margaret." We spent the next 2 hours going over every detail of the legal documentation. Margaret explained how life estates worked, what rights I had, and most importantly, what David and Jessica couldn't do, no matter what they thought they owned. "The beautiful thing about this," Margaret said as she packed up her papers, "is that they've already committed to several actions that could void the deed transfer entirely. Taking your keys without legal authority, planning to dispose of your property, attempting to force you from your home. Any one of those could be grounds for reversing the entire transaction." After Margaret left, I walked through my house with new eyes. Every room, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall represented not just memories, but legal rights that couldn't be taken away by entitled children who'd mistaken generosity for weakness. I was admiring Sarah's rose garden through the living room window when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Jessica's white BMW, followed by a large van with Premier Estate Services painted on the side. They were early. The estate sale people weren't supposed to arrive until Thursday, but here they were on Wednesday morning, ready to catalog my life for auction. I watched through the window as Jessica emerged from her car, dressed like she was attending a board meeting instead of stealing from an old man. She spoke animatedly with two people from the estate company, gesturing toward my house like she was directing a military operation. The estate sale coordinator, a thin woman with a clipboard and the predatory smile of someone who made money from other people's misfortune, nodded along to Jessica's instructions. Behind her, a younger man started unloading boxes and labeling supplies from the van. Jessica used her new key to unlock my front door, stepping inside like she owned the place, which, technically, she thought she did. "Hello," Jessica called out, her voice echoing through the entryway. "Dad, are you here?" I took my time walking from the kitchen to the living room, moving with the deliberate pace of a man who had nowhere urgent to be and all the time in the world to get there. "Good morning, Jessica," I said pleasantly. "You're early." "Oh, you know how these things are. Better to get started sooner rather than later." She gestured to the estate sale team, who were already examining my furniture, with the clinical detachment of medical examiners. "This is Susan from Premier Estate Services and her assistant, Mark. They're going to take inventory of everything today." Susan stepped forward with her clipboard. "All business. Mr. Sullivan, we'll try to be as respectful as possible during this process. We understand this can be emotional for families." "Oh, I'm not emotional about it at all," I said with a smile. "In fact, I'm quite interested to see how this plays out." Something in my tone must have registered with Susan, because she paused and looked between Jessica and me with the wariness of someone who'd been in this business long enough to recognize family drama when she saw it. "Before we begin," I continued, "I should probably mention that you'll need my written consent to catalog or remove any items from this house." Jessica's smile faltered slightly. "Dad, we discussed this yesterday. The house is in David's name now. We have the legal right to—" "Actually," I interrupted gently, "you don't." The room went silent. Susan stopped writing on her clipboard. Mark, who'd been examining my dining room table, straightened up and looked toward us with obvious concern. "I'm sorry, what?" Jessica's voice had lost its confident edge. "You don't have the legal right to catalog, remove, or dispose of any property in this house without my explicit written permission." I kept my tone conversational, almost friendly. "You see, while David may own the structure, I retain what's called a life estate on this property. That means I have the legal right to live here, undisturbed, until my death." Jessica's face went through several color changes, settling on an unhealthy shade of red. "That's impossible. You transferred the deed. David owns this house." "David owns the house, yes, but not the land it sits on, and certainly not the right to evict me or dispose of my belongings." I turned to Susan, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Flores here doesn't have the authority to hire your services." Susan looked at her clipboard, then at Jessica, then back at me. 20 years in the estate sale business had probably taught her to recognize legal trouble when it walked through the door. "Perhaps," Susan said carefully, "we should wait until this family matter is resolved before proceeding with any inventory." "There's nothing to resolve," Jessica snapped, but her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I have the keys. David has the deed. This man is just a bitter old fool who can't accept that he's no longer welcome here." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "let me clear this up for everyone." I dialed Margaret's number, putting the call on speaker so everyone could hear. "Margaret Chen, attorney at law." "Margaret, it's Robert. I have Jessica here with some estate sale people, and there seems to be some confusion about who has the authority to dispose of my property." "Ah, yes, we discussed this might happen." Margaret's voice carried the crisp authority of someone who'd dealt with this exact situation before. "To whom am I speaking?" Susan cleared her throat nervously. "This is Susan Walsh from Premier Estate Services. Bishi." "Ms. Walsh, I'm Margaret Chen, Mr. Sullivan's attorney. I need to inform you that Mr. Sullivan holds a life estate on this property, which means he has the exclusive right to occupy these premises and control all personal property within until his death. Any attempt to catalog, remove, or dispose of his belongings without his written consent would constitute theft under state law." The silence that followed was deafening. Susan's pen had stopped moving entirely. Mark stood frozen next to my dining room table like a statue. and Jessica's face had gone from red to pale in the span of about 10 seconds. Furthermore, Margaret continued, if any property has already been removed or disposed of, we'll be filing both civil and criminal charges against all parties involved. I think, Susan said quickly, there's been a mistake. Mark, pack everything up, we're leaving. As the estate sale team hastily gathered their supplies and headed for the door, Jessica stood in my living room looking like someone had just explained quantum physics to her in ancient Greek. This isn't over, she finally managed to say. Oh, but it is, I replied calmly. In fact, it's just beginning. After they left, I called David's cell phone. He answered on the third ring, sounding distracted and slightly out of breath. Hey, Dad, what's up? I'm in a meeting, so… Your wife just tried to have my belongings cataloged for an estate sale, I said without preamble. Silence on the other end of the line. David, are you there? Dad, look, Jessica might have gotten a little ahead of herself, but… A little ahead of herself? Son, she committed attempted theft. She brought strangers into my home to inventory my property without my consent. If my attorney hadn't intervened, your wife would be facing criminal charges right now. Another long silence. I don't understand, David said finally. The house is in my name. We have the right to… No, you don't. And if you'd bothered to do a proper title search instead of assuming you could steamroll your old man, you'd know that. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, probably trying to figure out what had gone wrong with their perfect plan. David, I want you to come over tonight, alone. We need to have a conversation about respect, family, and what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Dad, I can't just… 7 o'clock, son. Don't be late. I hung up before he could respond, then walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the rose garden Sarah had planted 30 years ago. The roses were blooming beautifully this year, just like she'd always said they would if you took proper care of them. Some things, I reflected, were worth fighting for. Some things were worth protecting, no matter what it cost. And some people needed to learn that underestimating a 72-year-old man who'd built an empire from nothing was the kind of mistake you only made once. The rest of Wednesday passed in blessed quiet, giving me time to think and plan. I made myself a proper lunch for the first time in weeks, not the sad sandwiches I'd been surviving on since this whole mess began. Today felt different. Today I had my power back. At exactly 7 o'clock, David's Honda pulled into the driveway. I watched through the kitchen window as he sat in his car for several minutes, probably gathering courage or maybe calling Jessica for last-minute instructions. When he finally walked to the front door, he moved like a man approaching his own execution. I let him knock twice before opening the door. Dad. His voice was smaller than I'd heard it since he was 12 years old. David, come in. He stepped inside cautiously, looking around like he expected to find legal documents scattered everywhere, or maybe a team of lawyers waiting in ambush. Instead, he found his father sitting calmly in the living room where he'd grown up, where we'd watched countless football games together, where I'd helped him with homework and listened to his teenage problems. Sit down, son. David perched on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The confidence he'd shown yesterday with Jessica by his side had evaporated completely. I talked to a lawyer today, he began. Good. What did they tell you? That you have something called a life estate, that we can't make you leave. His voice carried a mixture of confusion and frustration. Dad, why didn't you tell us about this when we asked for help with the house? I studied my son's face, looking for any sign of the boy I'd raised. The boy who used to build model airplanes with me in the garage. The boy who'd cried when his hamster died and made me promise we'd see it again in heaven. Would it have mattered? I asked quietly. What do you mean? If you'd known I had legal protection, would you and Jessica have treated me differently? Would you have been more respectful, more honest about your intentions? David opened his mouth, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. Son, yesterday your wife told me I was no longer welcome in my own home. She'd already picked out a nursing facility. She'd arranged for strangers to sell my belongings. She spoke about me like I was already dead. I kept my voice level, factual. Did you think that was appropriate? Jessica gets excited about things. She meant every word. I stood up and walked to the mantel where Sarah's picture sat next to David's high school graduation photo. Your wife looked me in the eye and told me I was too old, too much trouble, too inconvenient for their new life, and you stood there and let her. Dad, it's complicated. Jessica's under a lot of stress with her job, and we've been trying to have kids, and the money situation. The money situation. I turned back to face him. Let's talk about that, shall we? I walked to my desk and pulled out a thick folder, the same one I'd shown Margaret that morning. Bank statements, receipts, documentation of every penny I'd spent helping David and Jessica over the past 3 years. Do you know how much money I've given you since you married Jessica? David's face went pale. Dad, I don't think... $87,000. I set the folder on the coffee table between us. The wedding that Jessica insisted had to be at the country club. $22,000. The down payment for your first apartment when your credit was too damaged for a decent place. $15,000. Car repairs, credit card payments, Jessica's emergency dental work, that vacation to Mexico she said you desperately needed for your mental health. With each item I listed, David seemed to shrink further into himself. And then there's the big one. The reason we're sitting here tonight. I transferred a $2.3 million house into your name to help you get financing. No charge, no rent, no expectation except that I could continue living in the home I built with my own hands. We're grateful. Are you? I sat back down across from him. Because gratitude doesn't usually come with eviction notices and estate sales. David was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. I don't know how it got this bad, Dad. When Jessica and I first got together, she was different, sweeter, more considerate. But after we got married, especially after the business failed, she changed. She became harder, more demanding. And you went along with it. What choice did I have? She's my wife. Marriage is about compromise. Compromise is about finding middle ground, son. What Jessica demanded yesterday wasn't compromise. It was capitulation. She wanted me gone so she could have my house, and she expected you to choose her comfort over your father's dignity. She says you don't respect her, that you make her feel unwelcome in her own home. I almost laughed. Her own home? David, 3 days ago she couldn't even get approved for a studio apartment. The only reason she's living in a $2 million house is because I put the deed in your name to help with your financial problems. But legally it is our house now. Is it? I pulled out another document from Margaret's folder. This is called a quitclaim deed reversal. It's what happens when someone attempts to defraud the original property owner through misrepresentation or coercion. David's eyes widened as he read the legal terminology. Margaret Chen thinks we have a strong case for voiding the entire deed transfer. Attempted constructive eviction, disposal of personal property without consent, failure to disclose material facts about the property transfer. Any one of these could give me grounds to take the house back entirely. You wouldn't. 3 days ago I wouldn't have, but 3 days ago I thought I was helping my son and daughter-in-law. I didn't realize I was enabling thieves. The word hung between us like a physical presence. David flinched as if I'd slapped him. Dad, that's not fair. We never meant to steal anything. What would you call it? You asked for help with financing, so I transferred my house into your name. Then, the moment the paperwork was complete, Jessica decided I was no longer welcome to live there. She tried to have my belongings sold at auction. She'd already picked out a nursing home to warehouse me. What's the difference between that and theft? David was crying now, not the quiet tears of a man processing difficult truths, but the desperate sobs of someone who'd finally understood the magnitude of what they'd done. I never wanted to hurt you, he whispered. But you did hurt me, son. Not just by going along with Jessica's plan, but by standing there silently while she dismantled my life, by refusing to look me in the eye when I asked if this was really what you wanted. What can I do? How can I fix this? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, who'd let his wife convince him that his father was disposable. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to find some way back to the relationship we'd once had. But another part, the part that had been building for 3 years of watching Jessica's demands escalate and David's spine disappear, knew that comfort wasn't what he needed. That depends entirely on what you choose to do next, I said finally. What do you mean? I stood up and walked to the window overlooking Sarah's garden. In the gathering dusk, I could just make out the roses she'd planted, still blooming after all these years. Tomorrow morning, Jessica is going to wake up and realize that her plan has failed completely. She's going to be angry, probably furious. She's going to demand that you find some way to force me out of this house anyway. She's going to tell you that it's either her or me, that you have to choose between your wife and your father. David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. And if she does, then you'll find out what kind of man you really are. I turned back to face him, and for a moment I saw a flash of the boy he used to be. The boy who'd helped me build his treehouse, who'd insisted on using real nails even though he was only 8 years old, because he wanted it to be strong enough to last forever. Your mother and I raised you to be better than this, David. We taught you about honor, about loyalty, about protecting the people you love instead of sacrificing them for convenience. But we can't make your choices for you. Not anymore. Dad, I love you. You have to know that. I know you think you do, but love isn't just a feeling, son. It's a decision. It's choosing to do the right thing even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something you want. David nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure he fully understood what I was telling him. I need to ask you something, he said after a long silence. If I choose you, if I tell Jessica that you're staying and she needs to accept it, what happens to my marriage? It was a fair question, and one I'd been expecting. I don't know, I answered honestly. Jessica married you for reasons that had nothing to do with your character or your family values. She saw you as a stepping stone to the life she wanted, and when that didn't work out, she saw me as the solution to her problems. If you stand up to her now, she might respect you more, or she might decide you're not useful to her anymore. And if she leaves, then you'll discover that being alone is better than being with someone who doesn't respect you or the people you love. David sat quietly for several minutes, processing everything I'd told him. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Henderson walking her dog, the same route she'd taken every evening for the past 15 years. Normal life continuing in the neighborhood where I'd built my life, where I intended to stay until the day I died. There's something else you need to understand, I said finally. This isn't just about the house anymore. What happened yesterday changed things permanently. Jessica showed me exactly what she thinks of family, of respect, of the man who helped make her comfortable life possible. I can forgive a lot of things, son, but I won't be disrespected in my own home by someone who owes her lifestyle to my generosity. What are you saying? I'm saying that even if you choose to do the right thing now, Jessica and I will never have a normal relationship again. She's shown me who she really is, and I believe her. David's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and his face tightened. Jessica. He nodded. She wants to know how the conversation went. She's asking if you've agreed to move out voluntarily. What are you going to tell her? David stared at his phone for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. This was it, the moment that would define not just our relationship, but the kind of man he chose to be. Finally, he typed a response and showed me the screen. We need to talk when I get home. Dad's not moving out. He hit send before he could change his mind. There, he said, though his voice shook slightly. It's done. That's the first step, son, but it's only the first step. Jessica isn't going to accept this quietly. As if summoned by our conversation, David's phone immediately started ringing. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, and we both stared at it like it was a live grenade. Answer it, I said quietly. But remember that I can hear every word. David swiped to accept the call, his hand trembling slightly. Hello? What the hell do you mean he's not moving out? Jessica's voice was so loud I could hear every word from across the room. David, we discussed this. The old man is going to a facility and we're taking possession of our house. Jessica, calm down. We need to talk about this rationally. Rationally? There's nothing rational about letting a senile old man dictate terms to us in our own home. I felt my jaw clench at the word senile, but I remained silent. This was David's test, not mine. He's not senile, Jessica, and it's not our home. Legally, he has the right to stay here until he dies. Then we'll break the lease or whatever legal nonsense he's hiding behind? David, I am not spending the next 20 years taking care of your decrepit father while he slowly destroys the house we're supposed to inherit. The casual cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. She wasn't just talking about evicting me, she was planning for my death like it was a business opportunity. Jessica, you need to stop. You're talking about my father. Your father who's been manipulating us from day one. Your father who transferred the house to you knowing he had some kind of legal loophole that would let him stay. Don't you see? He played us, David. He made us think we were getting our own place when really he was just setting up a way to control us forever. I had to admire the speed with which she'd reconstructed reality to make herself the victim. In Jessica's version of events, my generosity had been manipulation. My desire to continue living in my own home was control, and their attempt to warehouse me was somehow justified self-defense. That's not what happened, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Think about it, David. He could have just helped us get a loan for our own place. Instead, he insisted on transferring his house to us. Why? Because this way he gets to keep living in his precious mansion while we're stuck taking care of him like unpaid servants. I could see the doubt creeping into David's expression. Jessica had always been skilled at rewriting history to suit her needs, and she was using every psychological trick she knew to make David question his own memory of events. I don't remember it that way, David said weakly. Of course you don't. You were desperate, and he took advantage of that desperation to trick us into becoming his caretakers. David, if you don't force him out now, we'll never have our own life. We'll never be able to start a family in peace. We'll be stuck in his house following his rules until the day he dies. The manipulation was masterful in its audacity. Jessica had transformed their attempted theft into victimhood, their greed into self-defense, their cruelty into necessity. And I could see it working on David, could see him starting to doubt himself and his memories. This was the moment that would determine everything. Would David stand up to his wife's manipulation, or would he cave under pressure the same way he'd been caving for 3 years? Jessica, David said finally, his voice stronger than it had been all evening. I don't care how you want to spin this. What you tried to do yesterday was wrong. Dad didn't trick us or manipulate us. We asked for help, and he gave it. The fact that he protected himself legally just proves he was smarter than we were. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Are you seriously taking his side over mine? Jessica's voice had gone dangerously quiet. I'm not taking sides. I'm trying to do the right thing. The right thing? David, I am your wife. Your loyalty is supposed to be to me, not to some old man who's trying to control our lives. He's not trying to control our lives, Jessica. He's trying to live his own life in peace. There's a difference. I felt a surge of pride watching my son finally stand up to the woman who'd been manipulating him for years. It was 3 years too late, but it was happening. Fine, Jessica said, her voice now ice-cold with fury. If that's how you want to play this, then you've made your choice. Don't expect me to be there when you figure out what a mistake you've made. The line went dead. David stared at his phone for a long moment, then looked up at me with eyes that seemed older than they had an hour ago. I think my wife just left me, he said quietly. Maybe, I replied. Or maybe she's just trying one more manipulation tactic to see if she can break your resolve. What do I do now? I walked over and put my hand on my son's shoulder, the first physical contact we'd had since this whole mess began. Now you wait and see what kind of woman you married. If Jessica loves you, she'll come home and we'll all figure out how to make this work. If she only loved what you could give her, then you're better off finding out now. David nodded slowly, though I could see the fear in his eyes. Fear of being alone, fear of losing the woman he'd thought he'd spent his life with, fear of admitting that his marriage had been built on foundations as shaky as his failed business. Dad, he said after a long silence, I'm sorry. For all of it. For letting her treat you that way. For not standing up for you sooner. For making you feel unwelcome in your own home. I know you are, son. Can you forgive me? I looked at this man who'd caused me so much pain over the past few days, who'd let his wife try to steal my life away, who'd stood silent while she planned my exile. But I also saw the boy I'd raised, the son who'd finally found his spine when it mattered most. Forgiveness isn't the issue, David. Trust is. You've shown me that when push comes to shove, you can do the right thing. But you've also shown me that it takes a crisis to bring out your backbone. That's going to have to change if we're going to rebuild our relationship. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't over. Jessica's going to come back, probably with lawyers, definitely with more manipulation tactics. She's going to try to make your life miserable until you give her what she wants. Are you prepared for that? David was quiet for a moment, considering the reality of what lay ahead. I guess I'll find out, he said finally. As if on cue, we heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the window, I could see Jessica's BMW, and she was getting out with the kind of purposeful stride that meant trouble. Looks like you're going to find out sooner than expected, I said. The front door burst open without a knock, Jessica storming into the living room like she owned the place, which, I had to remind myself, She thought she did. "David, we're leaving. Now." Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd never been told no by her husband. "Jessica, we need to talk about this calmly." "There's nothing to talk about. Either you come home with me right now, or I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning." The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. Jessica stood there in her designer clothes, perfectly made up even at 8 o'clock at night, holding my son's marriage hostage to get what she wanted. David looked at her, then at me, then back at her. I could see him weighing his options, measuring the cost of standing up to her against the price of giving in. "Jessica," he said quietly, "if you file for divorce because I won't help you steal my father's home, then maybe we shouldn't be married." The shock on Jessica's face was complete and absolute. In 3 years of marriage, David had apparently never called her bluff on anything. "You don't mean that." "I do mean it. What you tried to do yesterday was cruel and illegal. If you can't understand why that's wrong, then we have bigger problems than where my father lives." Jessica's perfect composure finally cracked. Her face flushed red, her hands clenched into fists, and when she spoke, her voice carried 3 years of suppressed rage. Fine. You want to choose a pathetic old man over your wife? You want to throw away our marriage for someone who's going to be dead in 10 years anyway? Then you deserve exactly what you're going to get." She spun on her heel and stalked toward the door, then turned back for one final shot. "Don't come crawling back to me when you realize what you've given up. And don't expect me to be understanding when your precious daddy starts needing diapers and round-the-clock care." The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. David and I sat in the sudden silence, processing what had just happened. My son had finally stood up to his wife, and his wife had revealed exactly who she was when she didn't get her way. "Well," David said after a long moment, "I guess that answers that question. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, son." "I'm not." David wiped his eyes and straightened his shoulders. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I can breathe." We sat together in the living room where he'd grown up, where Sarah had read him bedtime stories, where we'd celebrated his achievements and comforted his disappointments. It felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. "So what happens now?" David asked. I looked around at the house I'd built with my own hands, the home that Jessica had tried to steal, the place where 3 generations of my family had made memories. "Now," I said, "we figure out how to be a family again." Outside, I could hear Jessica's BMW tearing out of the driveway with enough force to leave rubber marks on the asphalt. The sound faded into the distance, taking with it 3 years of tension, manipulation, and walking on eggshells in my own home. David slumped back into the couch, looking simultaneously relieved and devastated. "I keep waiting to feel sad about this," he said quietly, "but all I feel is free." "That tells you everything you need to know about your marriage," I replied. Over the next few days, Jessica made several attempts to salvage her plan. She called David dozens of times, alternating between tears and threats. She sent her mother to guilt him about abandoning his wife. She even had her lawyer send a letter claiming David had a legal obligation to provide her with suitable housing, which Margaret Chen responded to with barely concealed amusement and a detailed explanation of why that argument would fail spectacularly in court. But the most telling moment came when Jessica showed up with a moving truck, expecting to take half the furniture from what she still insisted was her house. I watched from the kitchen window as she directed 2 movers toward the front door, her clipboard full of items she'd apparently decided belonged to her. I opened the door before she could use her key. "Good morning, Jessica. Can I help you with something?" Her smile was arctic. "I'm here to collect my belongings and the marital assets I'm entitled to." "From my house?" "From David's house, which, as his wife, I have legal claim to half of everything inside." I pulled out my phone and called Margaret Chen, putting her on speaker. "Margaret, I have Jessica here with movers, claiming she has the right to take furniture from my home." "Ah, yes, we've been expecting this. Put me on speaker, please." "You're on speaker, Margaret." "Mrs. Flores, this is Margaret Chen, Mr. Sullivan's attorney. I need to inform you that you have no legal claim to any property inside this residence. The furniture belongs to Mr. Sullivan, who has been living here for 37 years. Your marriage to David doesn't grant you ownership of his father's possessions." Jessica's face went through several color changes. "But the house is marital property." "No, it's not. The house belongs to David, but Mr. Sullivan holds a life estate. More importantly, All personal property inside belongs to Mr. Sullivan. If you remove so much as a coffee cup without his written permission, you'll be charged with theft." The movers, who'd been listening to this exchange with growing alarm, started backing toward their truck. "Ma'am," one of them said to Jessica, "we can't get involved in a legal dispute. If there's any question about ownership—" "There's no question," Jessica snapped. "I'm his daughter-in-law, and you have no legal standing here whatsoever." Margaret's voice cut through the speaker. "Gentlemen, I'd advise you to leave immediately before you become accessories to theft." The movers didn't need to be told twice. Within minutes, their truck was pulling away, leaving Jessica standing alone in my driveway with her clipboard and her rage. "This isn't over," she said, the same threat she'd been making for days. "Yes, it is," I replied calmly. "Your marriage is over, your claim to this property is over, and your ability to manipulate my son is over. The only thing left is for you to accept reality." She drove away that day and never came back. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Jessica discovered that David's name might be on the house deed, but he had no equity in it due to the life estate. She couldn't claim half of something that couldn't be sold or leveraged. Her lawyer tried several creative approaches, but Margaret Chen had anticipated every move. In the end, Jessica walked away with exactly what she'd brought to the marriage: nothing. David, meanwhile, began the slow process of rebuilding himself. He moved back into his childhood bedroom temporarily, and we started having the conversations we should have been having for years. Real conversations about respect and boundaries, and what it means to be a man who protects the people he loves instead of sacrificing them for convenience. "I keep thinking about Mom," he said one evening as we sat on the back porch, watching Sarah's roses bloom in the garden. "About what she would have thought of Jessica, of how I let things get so bad. Your mother would have seen through Jessica in about 5 minutes," I said, "but she also would have been proud of you for finally standing up when it mattered." "It took me too long." "Yes, it did, but you did it. That's what counts." 6 months later, David found a small apartment across town and a job with a construction company that appreciated his business background. We had dinner together twice a week, sometimes at his place, sometimes at mine. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt the relationship that Jessica had nearly destroyed. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if removing the toxic presence of someone who saw it as nothing more than a real estate transaction had restored its soul. I updated my will to reflect the new reality. The house would go to David when I died, but only if he promised to live in it himself for at least 5 years. No flipping, no quick sales, no treating it like a commodity. If he wanted to sell after that, fine. But he had to understand its value first. Margaret Chen made sure the legal documents were bulletproof. "After what you've been through," she said, "I want to make sure no one can ever pull this kind of stunt again." On quiet evenings, I often found myself sitting in Sarah's chair, looking out at the garden she'd planted and thinking about the lessons learned. Jessica had taught me that generosity without boundaries is just enabling, that legal protections matter as much as family bonds, that sometimes the people you love most will disappoint you in ways you never imagined possible. But she'd also taught me that standing up for yourself, even at 72, was not only possible, but necessary. That respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you have to command. That home isn't just a building you live in, it's a sanctuary you protect. Most importantly, she taught me that real family isn't about blood or legal documents or shared addresses. It's about people who choose to love and protect each other, even when it's difficult, even when it costs them something they want. David proved he was real family. Jessica proved she never was. And I proved that this old man wasn't going anywhere. The $2 million house Jessica had tried to steal remained exactly where it had always been, on the foundation I'd poured myself 37 years ago. The roses Sarah planted still bloomed every spring. The workshop where I'd built David's treehouse still held my tools and my memories. And the keys that Jessica had demanded so confidently that Tuesday afternoon, well, I had those back too. After all, some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth protecting. And some people need to learn that respect isn't negotiable, generosity isn't weakness, and home is exactly where you make your stand. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Click the video on your screen to hear another incredible story about family justice and standing up for what's right.